Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Evan Johnson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for Trans Family Support Services, and also I will be moderating our conversation today. I'm going to go ahead and have my panelists introduce themselves, but I will help coordinate that since with this virtual world, it can be a little awkward trying to figure out when it's your turn to share. So we'll just go on order of my screen. Gregory, could you go ahead and introduce yourself? Just share name, pronouns, any titles or positions that you feel are relevant.
Thanks, Evan. Hey, everybody. My name is Gregory. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them, and I'm the Youth Programs Coordinator for Trans Family Support Services. So I handle the Kyler's Connections mentorship program we have, as well as working with Gender Junk program and our youth support groups. And I also work as the youth advisor to the board for the North County LGBTQ Resource Center, and that's based in North County, San Diego. And I will pass it over to Elio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elio. My pronouns are he and they, and I am a youth ambassador for Trans Family Support Services. And so I will pass it on to Martine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martine. My pronouns are they, them. I am the youth program coordinator for East County, and I also do some facilitation for a couple of our groups that we offer, and I do some of our comms and media stuff. And I'm going to pass it on over to Morgan.
My name is Morgan, and my pronouns are she and her, and I don't really have a title, so that's it.
You do have a title. It's student. Student is important.
I'm a student.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So to get us started, I think before we kind of get into the question portion, we do have folks who sent in questions, obviously. But before we start that, I would love to open it up a little bit for you all to share a little bit of your story and whatever that means for you. Just a couple of like 2 to 3 minutes, whatever you would like to share. And let's go in a different order this time so that Gregory maybe doesn't feel on the spot. But let's go ahead and get started with Martine. If you want to tell us maybe a little bit about what brought you here today, how you got involved with Trans Family, and whatever pieces of your journey feel relevant.
Yeah, so I got involved with Trans Family because of some prior work that I was involved with, and I met Kathy, our executive director, and Joan Irving, one of our board members, at the Women's March in North County, and saw a they them pin, and I felt affirmed. And honestly, that stuck out as a poignant moment in my life because I was having some, personal strifes with my gender identity that I had gone through my mid-20s that led me to where I am today, being comfortable in my skin as someone who identifies as non-binary. And since then, I've just been able to really see the wide, vast majority of beautiful nature that this community offers. And the work that I'm getting to do with our youth has been honestly very empowering for myself, in that I learn a lot from them and the things they're going through. So that's kind of me and where I'm at and what led me here today and why I continue and want to do the work that I'm doing with the org.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Martine. And then I think for context, you are also currently in college, yes? And could you tell us where you're at and what you're studying?
Yes, I'm currently at Cuyamaca College. I just applied for transfer to the University of San Diego. I'm a poli-sci major with an emphasis on policy, with my overall goal to get my master's in public policy and hopefully eventually write some legislation.
Thank you. I don't know if you were able to see our panelist questions earlier when I sent them to you all, but we do have a couple of questions about policy that popped up, and just anticipate those being thrown your way. All right, Morgan, if you want to go ahead and share next, just a little bit about yourself.
Well, I came out as transgender when I was 10, and I transitioned at 10, and yeah, what else should I say?
You can go ahead and share, if you want to, a little bit about what that was like coming out at the age you were, how your family responded, anything that sticks out to you.
Well, coming out was kind of hard for me because number one, I was very young, and number two, I live in a small area. So when there's one trans person, everyone knows that there's only one trans person, and everyone knows who they are and where they live. So I would have people track me down. Everyone knew where I lived, at school. Everyone knew me as a trans girl, and it was really hard. And yeah.
Did it ever get easier, Morgan?
Over like now and probably like all my teens have been good. So mainly when I was like 10, 11, 12, those were the bad times. But once I got older, I feel like, especially the area I live in, people just kind of stopped caring and were more acceptive, I guess.
It's good to know. Thank you, Morgan. Gregory, do you want to go ahead and share next?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've started working with Trans Family later last year in August, and it was perfect timing for me because I had a change in my school schedule with COVID, and I ended up not moving to New York, so I needed to find something to do that was like a more permanent job. And Kathy, our executive director, had offered me the position like the year before, and I just wasn't available at that time, so I decided to try it out. And I thought that I would just be volunteering, and this ended up being a part-time position for me. And essentially what I really needed when I was younger transitioning was a mentor or like a person to help support me in my transition, or just to be able to talk to another trans person who had already been through the experiences that I was looking for, or like what I was heading for. And, you know, I had no idea about Kyler's Connections or about Trans Family that much, but I had been working with other LGBTQ organizations in the past. So I had been volunteering, and this was kind of like my first step into the professional world of being able to do presentations and to do competency trainings and to meet with young kiddos who were my age when I started thinking about my gender differently. And now I'm able to match them with a mentor of somebody in their own experience. And it's just so rewarding and so like fulfilling to me. Even if I wasn't being paid to do this, I would just do it because it's exactly what is needed. And, you know, I have an amazing team of people who are so incredible and talented, and I'm just really happy to be able to share the space with them. But for myself, in my own transition, I came out as trans as a sophomore in high school to my mom at first, and that did not go well. And I really struggled throughout high school with my gender journey, but like everything else outside of my life was good. Like I got good grades and stuff, and I had a good support group. But coming out to my family was the hardest part. And I've gotten a better relationship with my mom now that I'm older and I'm like on my own now. But with my dad, it continues to be a struggle that I have no contact with him and I don't reach out to him. And our relationship ended very badly. And it was not to say that this was like the breaking point, but me coming out was the moment that our relationship started to slip in a more concrete direction. So doing this work is like also really fulfilling for me because I don't want any young trans kids to go through what I went through or to feel like they're alone. So, you know, this is really fulfilling for me and just amazing to see these kids grow.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's really important. And, you know, obviously we have a pretty diverse range of ages here sitting on the panel with some of our youth team, with Morgan and Elio being a little bit younger, just entering Elio's just entering adulthood, and then Gregory, Martine, and myself, who are all pretty established into our adult lives. And all of us having come out at different points. So I think knowing that family aspect and how that family aspect has maybe varied with all of us, I think that's a really interesting piece to this story. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm also always going to be amused when either you or Martine referred to the youth as kiddos, because who was it who was giving me a hard time about calling them kiddos? I mean, it's something about people who do youth work is we all just refer to them that way. And I'm happy to see you all jumping on the train. All right, Elio, do you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi again, I'm Elio, as you know. So I started questioning my gender around middle school, and it wasn't really until high school, I'd say sophomore year, so very similar to Gregory, where I uh, was introduced to the virtual, not virtual at the time, but the virtual now, the support groups that Trans Family Support Services provides. And that also gave me an opportunity to just share my story and also listen to other people and see their experiences and see, you know, kind of what options were available to me, because a lot of the things that I learned in those support groups I had no idea of beforehand. And so I came out as transgender officially my senior year of high school, which went pretty well considering I had already established like a group of friends that were supportive throughout high school. So to the point that I came out senior year, it was kind of the attitude of, oh, I'm only going to be here for a year, and so it's fine. And then the pandemic hit, and so I was only really there for a few months. But over the pandemic and throughout 2020 and the beginning of 2021, I've started becoming more involved with Trans Family Support Services, doing things like these panels, and it's been a pretty incredible journey.
I would say so. I am also the facilitator of the high school support group, so I've been very lucky that I've gotten to see Elio kind of through a lot of this. So I just want to kind of call that out and say how appreciative I am for them being here, because it does take a lot for you to be able to say, like, this is who I am and this is why I'm here. And it would have totally been valid for you to not want to do that. So I'm very grateful to all of you for being here, and thank you so much. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started into the questions. We have folks who registered ahead of time with us, and so they submitted some questions for us that we're going to get started with, but there is an ability, I think, for people who are viewing to send comments as well and questions. So if things come up while we're talking, unless I am wildly misled with my assumptions of how technology works, feel free to reach out to us, and we would love to answer questions as they come up. So I have a couple of questions that are just kind of big picture questions, right? They're things that I think we see at a lot of these sorts of panels. And so I want to open it up for any of you who want to share. So the first question is, how can I just as a person be a successful ally? And I'll just open that up to everyone.
I can start with this one. So one thing that I always say, at least for me, makes a good ally and makes me feel comfortable in spaces is if you see something, say something. You know, if you see someone actively misgendering someone, if you see some rhetoric that is ignorant or that is hateful, to just correct it. Because at least for me, it makes it worse when things are kind of brushed aside, when things aren't brought up as this isn't correct, this is wrong, this isn't allowed in this space. So doing things like correcting people usually makes me feel more comfortable. I also am a big fan of just very subtly signaling that someone is a safe person, whether it be with rainbows. I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be, oh, wrong side, it doesn't have to be a huge flag like the one that I have in the background, but even something small as a bracelet, a pin, you know, even cisgender people having their pronouns, whether it be in emails with their email sign off, pins on shirts or backpacks, small things that signal that they are a safe person can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think in this conversation that has started happening around, you know, pronoun use and access to the trans community, I think we've forgotten that everyone uses pronouns regardless of if they're trans or cis. And for those of you who maybe don't know, cis, C-I-S, is the word for folks who are not trans, so cisgender as opposed to transgender. So yeah, Elio, I think that's a fantastic point. Everyone's able and allowed and welcome to display their pronouns. We all have our pronouns in our display names right now, with the virtual world being what it is and Zoom calls. There's a lot of opportunities to establish yourself. Gregory, I see you're unmuted, so why don't you go ahead next?
Yeah, I had a few ideas based on what Elio was sharing that, for me, the advocacy really shows up in the professional workplace and like going out into the world. And I would say that having these types of trainings, having these panels and like being able to meet with people one-on-one and to really speak to people outside of the community and just show up as our authentic selves counts as being an ally as well. And if you can, I would consider like putting yourself in our shoes and our experiences. And if you realize that your workplace is not affirming, or like you notice that some social circles that you're a part of could be more inclusive, then you can take that action to step up. And, it can be something as small as creating a GSA in your school, or like, creating some version of like LGBTQ or like, I guess, like cultural competency trainings for your staff, so that when people outside of your community do show up in your world, that you know how to address them properly and you know how to like handle things with respect and with honesty. And, I've been to a few of these trainings before, and I've noticed that a lot of older adults who like haven't heard about pronouns or like haven't been introduced to this world, they really just want to be educated and they want to help their young kiddos to feel affirmed, and they just don't have the resources to do that, or they feel like it's tiring to be able to research so many things and not know the answers. So put yourself out there. If you can put in the effort to suggest gender neutral bathrooms, or to have people put their pronouns in their bio or in their email signature, like all of those small things show that you are an ally to not just the LGBTQ community, but it shows like your overall cultural acceptance as a whole. Like it mingles into other intersecting identities and other aspects of our society where we're trying to accept each other and show more love and support. And I just feel like all of those small things really add up.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't take like the big actions to be an ally. Allyship really does shine in those small acknowledgments of the communities that exist. So I appreciate both of you emphasizing that. Anyone else have any thoughts about how, folks just on their day-to-day can be allies to the trans community?
I would agree with everything everyone has said. But one thing for me is like in middle school, I never had like anyone like wear pins or in their email have anything, their pronouns or anything. And then I got into high school and it was like half my teachers have their pronouns in their email. And my doors to the classrooms have little safe space rainbows in them. Like I never had that in middle school. But then I got to high school and I was like, wow.
I was just going to say that I would like to add that I think that allyship to me is continued education, and that can be applied to any, like Gregory was speaking on cultural competency. That's very much being a part of that, and that can be wrapped into a lack of acknowledgement in our cultural presence where we're at currently. And so I just think that if we want to be allies, we need to understand that we have to continuously work to educate ourselves on the things as they evolve, because we as a society continue to evolve, and so applications will. So our acknowledgement and understanding of it also need to, and that is through work in educating ourselves continuously. So.
And being here is definitely a step to that allyship. And in regards to that education piece, getting to hear the narratives and the stories of trans folk, it does a lot for your understanding. It personalizes, and it also shows the fact that, all of us sitting here, and I know I didn't share anything about myself because I'm the moderator, but all of us sitting here, we may identify similarly or completely differently, but we all have very unique stories and things that have happened to and with us. So being mindful of that piece that, yes, we are all united by the fact that we all identify within the trans community, but we all do have very different stories to share. Okay, I have a question here that I think is also a pretty good one for everyone to answer, but I want to direct it first to Gregory as our youth programs coordinator. So what do we do for our youth who we see fully isolating themselves from their family, from their friends, schools, other support resources, and how do we support them when we see that they're struggling?
Yeah, totally. I've definitely noticed with the virtual world being the main thing right now that a lot of our kiddos who were getting support in school or being able to reach out to their friends and stuff aren't getting that. And it's only through virtual world where they can be able to get support. So unfortunately, it kind of puts this barrier in between them and the rest of the world where like they have to force themselves to reach out instead of like being able to integrate naturally. And that's where we step in, where like we are able to provide for them resources and like answer them questions and stuff, but at the end of the day they're still going to be in their room in their house. And so what we try to do is we try to create an environment that is as interactive as possible. And so like we have our youth support groups, we have groups for youth up to age 18, and then an adults group from 18 to 30. And, we plan weekly activities and we do events throughout the month. And we really try to interact more with our Discord and our social media and really trying to create a live GSA 24/7. And what I've seen is a lot of kiddos who live in more rural areas who might not have had a GSA before or might not have been able to connect with anybody in the physical world are now able to meet people online that are maybe a few miles away or in a different state, but it's somebody that's going through their similar experience. And, I've had to help some kiddos out with some mental health stuff. And it's hard when we can't physically be there to support them, but we know that they're going to be online on their phone at this time and we'll try to message them. And, it takes a little bit more effort on our part to have to put ourselves out there and like find them what they need, but it's still available. And we've been able to change our direction really well. And as we move into in-person, we're still going to be able to help out anybody in any area virtually. And, I just hope that for the kiddos that are really isolated right now, that they do realize that we are here for them and that, even though they might not have a physical LGBTQ center that they can go to, that we're here and that we can try to support them in any way.
What I'm hearing from what you all just shared, Gregory, I think it very much boils down to this piece of creating the opportunity, creating the space for our youth to reach out when they're ready to reach out for that help, right? Like when they're ready to interact in the Discord server, we have those game nights and those social nights.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't act as like anybody's therapist. We're just young kiddos trying to also help young kiddos. And, we're facilitating these groups, but they're really the leaders of their own journey. And they're the ones that are asking help from their peers or like talking about more personal things online that, they want that support. So we just create that space for them, but they're the ones that are really taking charge in their journey.
The social worker in me very much appreciates that like self-autonomy. Like, yeah, they get to decide when they're ready for the support group. I appreciate that a lot. Anyone else want to kind of weigh in on this piece of how do we best support the youth that we can like see self-isolating and struggling and those pieces? Because if not, I'll say something. I'll talk.
I mean, I'm just going to echo what Gregory said, which is, providing virtual spaces. And I think that this last year in 2020, in which we all survived and are surviving a pandemic, I think that we were proven the resilience that the community has. And by creating more community, the more resilient we all are. And so these services that we're providing and just like the experiences and the conversations and the support we're able to provide in the virtual world and it being ongoing past the point of, us no longer being in this pandemic and our return to being in person, it's allowed us to understand and rethink how we are going to be able to provide future support for future kiddos who need that. So snaps to just all of this.
So Gregory really answered it quite succinctly. I will say I've been doing this work for 5 years, specifically with trans family and the support groups. And we see folks come into our support groups who were clearly bribed to come and maybe weren't super enthusiastic about it. And that's okay. And we just give them that space to show up and sit and not say anything and, maybe be a little isolating for a little bit while, I'm very nosy, and so I'll try and encourage it. But it's very much this piece where our trans youth in particular are having this very deep personal conversation with themselves, and they're not always ready to share those narratives with us, even if we feel like we're ready to hear it. And so I think when we're seeing them struggling and when we're seeing them being isolated and isolating themselves, it's exactly like Gregory and Martine have said, of creating the space, allowing the opportunity. And unfortunately, we have to just let them get there on their own, establishing that we're there to support them. We're their cheerleaders, but we cannot convince them to go anywhere. All right. I do see we have a question that's been submitted, and I think this is another good one to just open up to everyone. So we're kind of getting into like some personal stuff with our own stories here. So feel free to not answer if that's too much for you or you're not feeling up to that. But what age did you become aware of maybe the rejection of trans identities? And this person shares that they're the parent of a trans kiddo who is not quite at that space where they're aware what's going on. And this parent is trying to figure out, is it appropriate to tell them, their child, or how do we navigate that as allies? So I guess twofold question, right? First of all, how do we become, and when did we become aware that society didn't see us the same way we saw ourselves? And I think, Morgan, that might be the best question for you to answer, since I think all of us were pretty aware at our ages when we came out. So go ahead, Morgan, if you want to answer that first part to the question.
I came out at 10, so that's pretty close to your son. I became aware of rejection just being in school, and mainly by adults. I never had kids go up to me and really make fun of me or pick on me or say. It was adults, like grown people. So I went through that all through middle school, all through elementary school, all through high school, which that actually makes, now that I don't want to scare people. I don't know. But what am I trying to say? I have experienced rejection from adults too, and it will get better.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece of, there are going to be folks in the world, who just aren't ready to be introduced to this concept, these identities, these experiences. I think the parent's concern then becomes, do we guard them from that, or how do we have these conversations? And Martine, I see you're unmuted as well, if you wanted to weigh into that.
Yeah, I think for me, I can speak from my experiences. I try not to speak from others because that's not my place, right? And so for me, I always remember being raised with a consciousness of being accepted for being a queer individual, but then like when you become aware of your gender identity, whatever age that be, I think like that becomes a new layer of rejection that hurts maybe a little bit differently. And so just like having the foundation of understanding that rejection from others speaks more on others than it does yourself, and like kind of taking that motto of like supporting you. And I currently am not a parent, but I support kiddos. And so what I like to say is that my role is to gas them up and provide them with support to let them know, right? And the most that I can do is provide that support for them and prepare them for that rejection that is an inevitable part of society in our life, no matter what the aspect. So that would be kind of like where I would lead that and how I feel. And I take my point of interest, not point of interest, but my point of direction.
And I think there's something to be said about what happens behind the scenes. If these are adults that are having comments about a child, right, and about how a child is being raised, at a certain point, it's not our place as adults to have that conversation with our youth, but rather the other adults in the room, and to let them know that's not appropriate for you to say, and I don't want to be a part of these conversations. And whether that just looks like you removing that adult from your life or not, I don't think that's inappropriate or overstepping as a parent to say, I as an adult don't want these people in my life, if they're not affirming of this entire community, not just my youth. Martine, while I have you though, in particular, speaking of onto these conversations about, you know, interacting with other adults, and in particular around acceptance and maybe folks who may be a little bit less accepting and affirming, how do we navigate conversations that are very anti-trans in their rhetoric, right? So things like bathroom bills and right now sports and whether or not trans girls get to participate on women's and girls sports teams. How do we have those conversations in a way that is productive and hopefully educational? And at what point do we say, like, it's just not worth it?
I think that it starts with understanding that, right, back to the point of allyship, which is being educated and continuing to educate. And so before you speak on these things, to educate yourself on them so you understand what is being spoken on. And then, you know, trying to understand that when we talk about this is no different than talking about when we talk about, you know, segregation of race and segregating people for something that doesn't apply to the difference in ability, right? So the argument that, you know, there's going to be some sort of genetic difference and that's why we shouldn't allow this, you know, I think that, again, that's a point of understanding and educating behind the science of it and kind of really digging into those things. And then also where you direct those conversations and being able to understand that your voice is going to be much more mighty when it's being amplified of those in the same tone. So trying to find people who are going to be working on counteractive bills and trying to do possibly less with frivolous frustration, which comes from arguing with someone who might want to just prove their own point, and maybe channeling that energy towards calling a governor and the trans week of visibility and trying to actively, effectively change the course and direction of the legislation that is currently being, you know, not actively written, but currently has been inked and is going to votes. So, but education, channeling it to the proper areas where that energy could go to be creating effective change, I would say, is the two biggest things. And then the biggest thing with response to the question of when to step out, when you feel like you aren't going somewhere or you feel like you're becoming frustrated, no one's ever going to get somewhere when you're feeling frustrated. That's your key to step out and say, we can talk about this later.
That's just good practice to have in your life. I think while we're on this note of legislation and these pieces around politics and law, I want to open this up to everyone because, you know, some very big changes to legislation have happened in the past couple of months. And so I wanted to open it up for us to talk a little bit about the Equality Act and you know, what does that mean for us as a community? And I may lean again on Martine for this if no one else wants to really speak up, but for any of you all who would want to share what this means to you, you know, just as you yourself, the individual, and maybe what this could mean for the community that we exist within.
I could share a bit about that. So I've been keeping tabs on a lot of the policies being created right now and just any trans news I try to be up to date on. And it's just really interesting to me that in 2021, in this generation, we're still dealing with different versions of the same problem that since the 1960s, and of course, even before that, like trans people have existed, but I would say since like 1960s, 1970s, where trans people started to make a presence, it's just been one combative bill after another, and it just comes from a place of fear and uneducation and tons of cultural influence from our families and generational trauma and all of that stuff that, you know, is really preventing our progress. And I just see this as like the next wave of social justice. It's like hopefully the last missing piece for us to all come together and kind of agree on the same thing. And, you know, unfortunately with some of our more rural areas where there's a higher rate of transphobia or trans violence, it's just goes to show like the lack of acceptance and the lack of education in those communities. And just because trans people are existing in a more open presence now doesn't mean that trans people are suddenly more popular or that being trans is like a new thing. There's always been communities of different genders and communities of more than two gender experiences. And I just feel like, you know, with the bathroom bills or with the legislation against trans women in sports, that it's just coming from that place of fear. And if trans people weren't as powerful as they actually are, if we weren't as influential as we really are, then people wouldn't try so hard to try to take away our rights. And it's a fear that if we start accepting people of different identities, if we start accepting people at all, then we'll be equal to them. And people are afraid of being equal to the things that they're demonizing, and to be on the same playing field as other people that they strike religion against or strike culture against. So I think, especially for older generations, that it's going to take a lot of education and a lot of understanding to be able to get to a centralized place. But I really see this as just a wake-up call for a lot of people to really pick which side of history that they're on and which side they're going to support. And that's not to say that like people on either side or that there are sides, but just that, you know, our acceptance of our identities is more than just the individual person. It's about a collective experience of being accepting of all people regardless.
I think it's important while we're talking about this just to mention that there currently is no federal legislation to protect trans identifying folks. I'm very lucky, as most of us in this call, in this panel are, that we're in California where there are quite a few protections. But Morgan, I believe you're in Virginia, and I have no idea what Virginia looks like when it comes to state law protecting especially trans students, because California, that's where a lot of the emphasis has been. So something like the Equality Act, something that federally recognizes these identities and also establishes a precedent, is going to be major to helping some of those states that aren't quite where states like California is at. It's gonna help them make that educational piece and learn that piece that Gregory was talking about. Did anyone else want to share about the Equality Act or what that means for them? Because if not, we're going to totally switch gears, and I really hope you're ready for it. Okay, great. No one's saying anything. I'm very heavy on that student piece, on the youth piece, because that's the population that I serve, and a lot of our questions are about kind of that education perspective as well. I think teachers are in a very fortunate and influential predicament where they establish really close relationships with their students. And sometimes they are, in my case, the first adult I ever told was a teacher that I actually never even had. I just hung out in his classroom a lot. And I think about him pretty fondly in these days of the virtual world. But teachers are in this interesting position where they have a lot of influence over how those early pieces of coming out look like. And so we have some educators who sent in some questions, and one of them specifically asking about students who come out to them and share their concerns and their questions around their own gender identities. And so how do our teachers in particular, I know we talked a little bit about allyship, but how do teachers in particular support youth who are maybe not ready to come out to the whole school, or maybe they're trying to navigate the school system? You know, the fun educational pieces.
I have a friend who is an educator and works, and honestly, I think the way that you start is by, trying to, again, create effective change for those around you. And so speaking back to those kind of like those trainings in which people are given a safe space to ask questions, as educators often are kind of, from the student perspective, the all-knowing person. So like having to have a moment of vulnerability where you're asking questions rather than giving answers, that can feel very, disarming. And so from a point of there, and so the reason why I bring that up is because I had that friend reach out to me knowing the work I do and ask for, more information to forward it along to their administrator. because they felt like, that they wanted to do more to work to provide a safe space for the students, those who have confided in them and those who had not. Right. And so I think that's a great place to start. And then also just, being being comfortable with not having the answers and saying, I'm going to find those for you, and being more vocal to your administrators to say you need those resources to provide that support for your students. That's kind of really what it is. I know some really wonderful educators too, Evan, that were formative people in my life still currently as an adult, going almost into my 30s. And I wouldn't be where I am today if they didn't do things like, take the time to educate themselves and really support me on my gender journey to get me to where I am at my level of college education. So.
Gregory, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so with like educators and people in my life in the school system, they've been absolutely a huge resource for me. And as I mentioned, as I came out as a sophomore in high school, we didn't have a gender neutral bathroom at the time, and we had a GSA, but I wasn't a part of it. And it was really since coming out that I was able to reach out to so many more people. And that GSA did implement a gender neutral bathroom when I had graduated, but I was a part of the team that put that together. And a lot of my teachers in high school who knew me before transition were super cool about changing my name in the system and like calling me by Gregory, even though I wasn't able to change it on the roster. And that was super affirming for me as well. And it was in college that I realized that I would be able to change my name on the roster myself. And that was like a huge deal for me, so that I didn't have to come out to every person or every professor that saw my name as a different thing on the board. And if that option is available to you, then absolutely utilize that. And if it's not, then maybe take that opportunity to ask your school system or ask the school board why that isn't an option for our young kiddos who go by a different name or change their name, and to make that more accessible for them, so they don't have to be pressured to come out to every person to just be safe at school.
And then Elio, I saw you unmute yourself earlier as well.
Yes, I also have thoughts. So for me, one thing that really helped when I came out as transgender my senior year of high school was just being flexible and being kind. My school has it technically has 2 gender neutral restrooms. One of them's always locked, and the other one was usually occupied by other students that wanted to skip class. But there was one period, second period in the morning, that I knew it would always be unoccupied. And so I actually approached my second period teacher and I asked him, I need to use the restroom during the day because I'm human and that's what humans do. And it's usually unoccupied during your period. Do you mind if I go to the restroom at the beginning of your period every day? Which, typically with especially high school students where, skipping class, it's boring and you use the restroom to take a break. Doing something like using the restroom at the same time every day is typically a red flag. But this teacher was so good about being respectful and flexible and kind. And he actually let me use the restroom at the beginning of his period every single day. And so I always knew that whenever I was in his period, I was safe and I knew I could use the restroom when I needed to. So things like that were really helpful. Also very small things. I know that when teachers take attendance, at least for me, before I had my legal name change, I always dreaded them saying my dead name out loud and me having to go, oh, actually, that's not the name I go by. And then it became a whole thing. So I'm a big fan of teachers standing outside the door and having the name list and saying, mark off your name. And if there's any name that you prefer that I use, then tell me and I'll write it down. Or even little note cards that you put on the desk and it says names, pronouns, fun fact, what do you want to get out of this class, that you can collect at the end of the day. And it eliminates that stress of, oh my gosh, my teacher is going to say my dead name out loud and then I have to explain it in front of all these other students. It's just big stress reliever.
What I've seen some of my professors do, and I didn't see this at the high school level, but I did see this when I started college, was professors would just say last name as it appeared on attendance. And they would say, and you tell me your first name. So that's also an option. There's a lot of ways of avoiding kind of that awkward piece of, I have an identical twin and she doesn't go by her legal name, but she's also fine with it. So she'll keep it as her legal name. And so it's very awkward for people when they find out that the name that she goes by, which is Milo, is not at all related to what her legal name is. And so allowing her to have that space as well to change her name with teachers and to say, no, my name is actually Milo. That was also a huge piece for her. And Morgan, I kind of want to point the attention to you for a moment. At that elementary level, what can teachers do to support trans youth?
I don't know. I would just be supportive. Like my fourth grade teacher, she was one of my best teachers I've ever had. My third grade teacher, I was gonna say something, but I was like, this is kind of like a story, so I don't know if it goes along with the question. But I remember in third grade, I told my third grade teacher that I was gonna transition over the summer, and when she's gonna see me next year, it's gonna be a girl. And she was so supportive, which is really nice. So I always had her there. And then my fourth grade teacher was super supportive. My social worker, super supportive. And when I came out, we had like a morning meeting and told everyone in the whole class so they weren't freaked out or anything. And I don't know, elementary school was weird though, because for me, it was like, no one really talked about it. It's more like middle school. Like in middle school, my seventh grade math teacher wore a Protect Trans Kids shirt to school, and everyone saw it, and that made me feel good. But like elementary school, they didn't really do that. It was more, more middle school, more high school. I saw teachers actually going out of their way to be more supportive.
I think it becomes this piece, and that's really interesting that you bring that up, Morgan, with you saw more visible support once you got to those higher education levels of middle and high school, where we've kind of matured this conversation, where we see that youth, are coming out as trans in these middle and high school years, but clearly they are coming out younger. And so, leaning on your school admin saying like, hey, it's really important to me that I am affirming of trans identities every day and always. And so I have this shirt, I'm going to wear it to school. And, I want your support if teachers come to me or if parents come to me and they take issue with it. I want the school's support. Morgan also brings up a really interesting point with school social workers, leaning on the other staff you have at hand with you. Student services specialists, is that what that position was called at Poway Unified, Elio? Yeah, student services specialists, school social workers, school psychologists, school counselors. You have a whole team and network there to support these youth, and being really mindful. And Martine just put in the chat, because they're an absolute gift, but removing the politics of it and remembering that it's just about supporting the trans youth and supporting youth in general. I think that piece is really important, especially for our elementary teachers. We are coming up pretty close on time. We have about 12 minutes left. And so I do want to ask some of these kind of more personal and a little bit more narrative questions. And so I have one question here that I really want to ask, and I also want to add my own question to it. Somebody sent in, are you afraid of your future looking different now that you're out as a part of this community? And then I also want to ask, are you excited or hopeful about being a part of the LGBTQ community? How has coming out and interacting with other folks who identify similarly, if you've been allowed that opportunity, or just existing in your own truth, how has that changed the way you talk about and think about your own future? And that's open to everyone, because I just want to know everyone's answers. I'm nosy.
So I originally came out when I was 13 years old as bisexual, and I always, the old joke is I never brought a girl home. And as I've gotten older, everything has in myself, as I've been able to become more comfortable with myself, I started to look back on some of the things that really didn't make sense to me in my youth. As far as like in high school, I wore makeup. I was very unapologetically who I saw myself as. And I always say that it was that society wasn't prepared for who I was. And so the area that I'm in growing up, like that kind of was part of that. And so like now that I'm older, and it's like I felt so solidified in that. And now as a person who understands that I was struggles with my own gender identity, I'm at a point now where it's another point of education and coming out, where I have to have those same kind of conversations and dialogue with people in the area in which I had to have those original conversations with. And so I would say that, like, do I feel safe? Yes, because I create safety for myself. But I would say that it is triggering, in that it makes you have to remember points of your life maybe that were not the most warm feeling. And so, but within the community itself, the larger LGBTQ community, you know, I think it reminded me that we in ourselves have a lot of work to do. And we aren't perfect as a whole, but I think the biggest thing is that we still move forward and try to show that we love each other. And I think that within the last couple of years that, like, we've expressed even more so that, like, we are less of a community and more of a family. But I think that we understand in this group, and maybe those watching, that those two things are one and the same. And so, yeah.
That's very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Oh, Gregory, I see you're unmuted. Yes.
Yeah, I can share a little bit. So yeah, safety is definitely like a huge thing for me. Like even before coming out as trans, that my safety as a person of color being in a predominantly white community was an issue for me. And I always say this in a bittersweet way, but I'm grateful that I haven't experienced physical or emotional violence for being a person of color, but I have been shunned out of Black centered groups for being queer, and then shunned out of white centered groups or non person of color groups for being a person of color, and then a little bit of both. So it always comes with like a tinge of non-acceptance, but I have to consider like where I've grown up, that I'm in Southern California, and although we have more protections and more laws that are out there to like help support us, it's still certain pockets of this area and certain parts of the world that are not accepting. So I won't see myself traveling to a state that doesn't have protections that would keep me safe if I was to ever face harm or if somebody tried to harm me. And, you know, unfortunately, I just heard about this news the other day, but there was a trans man who was almost beaten to death in the same town that I grew up in. And I know the exact restaurant that they were at when this happened. And it was like extremely terrifying and traumatizing to think that like that easily could have been me that day, and that I still localize in that area and I'm still live close to that area. But it's like every moment of vulnerability in these spaces that aren't accepting is like you putting yourself on the front lines, and you know, having to decide how well you're going to pass that day, or like what you are going to dress as, of like how much attention you're going to get, like all of these factors and things that non-trans people don't consider or don't even care about. It's like the extra effort to just be safe is like a huge part of the day. And again, with like that gratitude piece, it's like, oh, I'm grateful that I haven't been physically assaulted, but I don't feel like that's something that I should be so happy about, that like that's the baseline. And you know, for myself, it's like every opportunity like this, like on a panel where I'm able to share my story, or I'm able to help somebody that's younger than me go through their transition, or like I'm able to, you know, go to other LGBTQ organizations. Like I know that we're putting in the work and we're making changes and like we're representing people. But if I don't do this work to make my community safe, then it won't be safe for the next generation. So I feel like it's my own personal responsibility to pave that path for other people, and for them to take it on when I pass, and to be able to make our town safer. And it's just really something that comes up every day, honestly, is, you know, how far is someone going to go to interact with you or to like try and stop you from being who you are. So it's difficult. The safety piece is really scary sometimes.
Gregory, I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And Martine said something when they were sharing as well, of this piece of you're constantly coming out, you're constantly checking how well you pass. You know, when I was 18 and applying for like my first job, I remember being very mindful of where I applied to jobs, right? It was all organizations that had taken public stances pro the LGBTQ community. And even then, I never came out to them as trans. because of that piece of I didn't know what my employment security would look like. I didn't know what my safety would look like. And there's a lot of that, you know, kind of constant checking yourself and your surroundings and hoping that you have bolstered yourself enough and you've surrounded yourself with the right people so that if anything were to happen, you would still be safe because you have, you know, this support network that you've created. With our last, you know, couple of minutes, I want to lean into that piece of support network, right? And what that's looked like and how that shaped some of our experiences. I know for myself, you know, I'll speak personally for a second. Working in this community, getting the opportunity to do this work has allowed me to come out. When I first started doing this work, I was not out to my parents. I was barely out to anyone. I was out to my sister and my friends, and that was it. And the longer I was allowed to share my story and to tell my truth, and the more strangers I told, the easier it became to tell the people that I cared about. And now I'm at this place where, you know, being misgendered or having to disclose my dead name to someone is a little bit less overwhelming because I know I can come home and I can be like, oh my God, Mom, you would not believe how the doctor interacted with me today. And this is the conversation we had. And my support network has become this huge thing for me, and found family. I know we talk about it a lot with the trans community or the queer community as a general. I talk about it a lot with my kiddos who attend my support group because it feels very special to me. But, you know, kind of closing with this message of it's not all bad. I personally love being in this community. I love identifying as trans. So maybe, I don't know, open this up to everyone, but what are the joys of being in this community? What is the joy of being trans? Because this day is all about celebrating that joy.
I would like to share a little bit. So I know for me, when fun fact, I actually attended the support group that Evan facilitates when I was a minor, and so that's how we know each other. And I was actually one of those kids that did not want to be there. I was brought there by my mom. She said, you have to be there. If you don't like it, then text me and we'll go home. And honestly, I didn't really like it, but I also didn't text her to go home because I recognized that these were people that I could find support in and that I could find a community in. And that's something that is really something that I love about being transgender is our community. And we're also supportive of each other and supportive of also the intersectionalities, you know, me being Mexican and being transgender. I'm able to be Mexican and transgender in this space. I don't have to pick. And I love that about our community. And one also thing that I'll say is that, you know, I'm currently a biology major at University of San Francisco. Right now, I'm taking a chemistry class and we learn about energy, right? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And I think it is very important to recognize that as much negative energy as there is being put out in the world, there is an equal amount of positive energy because there has to be. And there is always people that are fighting the good fight, always people that are supporting us, that love us, and that are supporting you and that love you.
Elio, oh, you're so profound. What a great, like, oh my gosh. Okay, wait, no, we still have a minute though. Anyway, okay, so I'll take that minute. I'm going to own this minute. I'm going to say thank you all so much for sitting on this panel with me and answering my nosy questions and being so vulnerable and open and trusting us with the information that you gave us. And hopefully, I hope some of you who are watching are able to take this information, take our experiences, and help make the world better for our youth in particular. You know, our kiddos who are just kind of stepping into adulthood, our folks like Morgan who are coming out at, you know, 10 years old, someone in the audience with their youth who's 8. We're making this world safer by sitting in these spaces and taking up space. You know, we're all doing a huge part of our own ability with what we have, with what our ability is. And so I really appreciate all of my panelists. Thank you all so much. I see there's a lot of comments coming in of thanking you all for being the way that you are and being so wonderful. And I'm lucky to know a lot of you personally. So, you know, I can with full confidence say that it's all pretty true. And thank you as well to everyone who watched this past hour, or even if you only watched a little bit of this. You all are also doing amazing things out there, and you're making the world better, and you're making the world safer, and we appreciate and love you. So yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone. And I think this ends it, right? Like, do we all feel good about this ending? Cool. All right. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great night.